In Season 1, Verstappen was dominant as always, grabbing 7 wins and 13 podiums. Just a note to make, each season is 16 races instead of 23, just so people don't retire before the last race. The Brawn drivers were separated a lot as Barrichello managed 30 points to help them finish 7th in the Constructors, and Liam Lawson was second last in the standings. Alonso also got his 33rd win, but the main drama happened in the driver market, so onto the driver moves. Starting off with Hamilton, and he was dropped by Mercedes and replaced by Pourchaire. Albon swapped seats with De Vries and they both rejoined their old teams. Tsunoda went to Haas to replace Magnussen, who went to Aston Martin. Stroll filled Yuki's seat at AlphaTauri, and Perez moved to Williams to replace Sargent, who logically went to Ferrari as Leclerc joined Red Bull. So that was mid-season, but what about post-season? Sargent was dropped by Ferrari as Pourchaire moved to the Scuderia. Leclerc filled the Pourchaire-shaped hole left at Mercedes to join them again in a simulation. Stroll moved to Red Bull to replace Leclerc. Liam Lawson moved from Brawn to AlphaTauri as he replaced Stroll, and the outgoing Lawson was replaced by Piastri. Magnussen replaced Piastri at Williams, and Drogovic was promoted by Aston Martin to the seat left behind by K-Mag. Hulkenberg also retired, and so Albon went to Haas. So, with one seat left at AlphaTauri, who would take it? Well, so Lewis Hamilton would, as he had a point to prove. For next season there is chassis regulation changes, and looking at the performance graph, Haas looked pretty good, and Brawn are now last in the standings. On to Season 2, and Mercedes take the Constructors while Verstappen won the Drivers. Once again, he was comfortably ahead of second, getting 8 wins and 12 podiums. We also have first time wins for Stroll, who got 2 and nearly helped Red Bull get the Constructors title. The Brawn drivers were bad this year and the car was not good, and they finished last in the team standings and 19th and 21st in the drivers. On to driver moves, and we had one mid-season switch as Drogovic was dropped by Aston Martin for Sargent. But at the end of the season, Perez retired and left his Golden Williams seat up for grabs. Norris took it and left the seat open at McLaren. Alonso was there to take it and was replaced at Aston Martin by Pourchaire. Ocon replaced the outgoing Pourchaire at Ferrari, and Sargent joined Alpine to fill Ocon's old seat. Gasly then went to Aston Martin to fill the empty seat left behind by Sargent. Lawson replaced Gasly at Alpine, and finally Drogovic went to AlphaTauri to complete the grid for Season 3. For next season there is big regulation changes as aero, powertrain and durability are all affected. Looking at the performance graph, Brawn have really fallen off and Red Bull are miles clear of anyone else. Season 3 and Verstappen won again as Leclerc was close and Mercedes won the Constructors again. Gasly got 2 wins in the Aston Martin as they were good enough for 3rd, and shout out to Norris who managed to get a podium in the Williams. Things are not looking good at Brawn still as Barrichello and Piastri could not pick up any points and finished way down the order. We aren't going to ignore Alpine as well, who scored no points and finished 9th. There aren't as many lineup changes for Season 4, but it started with Alonso calling it quits and retiring. This led to Hauger replacing him at McLaren. De Vries was dropped and replaced by Piastri at Williams. Stroll moved to Brawn to replace the outgoing Piastri, and Pourchaire moved to Red Bull. And De Vries moved to Aston Martin to replace Theo. For Season 4 there were no reg changes, and the performance graph showed that Aston Martin were now better than Red Bull and Brawn had caught up to AlphaTauri. Also, a quick mention to Haas, who look level with the 4th best team, Ferrari. There could be some shocks coming our way very soon. In Season 4, we got our first different title winner as Leclerc claimed his first and Mercedes got the Constructors again. Him and Russell battled for the whole season, being separated by just 9 points. Verstappen was also down in 4th as he fell off big time. Norris also got another podium as Williams were 5th in the standings, and Haas majorly underperformed as they finished in 8th with 7 points. And the less said about Brawn the better. Moving on to the driver changes, and Hauger replaced Yuki at Haas, and Tsunoda went to AlphaTauri to replace Drogovic. Felipe went to McLaren to fill Hauger's seat, and Ocon was dropped by Ferrari, leading to them employing Jehan Deruvala. There were durability and chassis regulation changes for Season 5, and the performance graph still gives pretty depressing readings for Brawn. Aston Martin's great car at the end of Season 3 has now become the 5th best as McLaren made big strides, but Mercedes are looking good again. In Season 5, Russell claimed his first title as he won comfortably over Leclerc, and Mercedes were comfortably ahead of anyone else. Verstappen was powerless again as he could only manage 3 wins and a 3rd place in the championship. Barrichello managed to claim 35 points, and along with Stroll's 8, this helped Brawn to finish in 7th. Now onto the driver moves, and at mid-season Hamilton retired, which led to some change. Deruvala went to AlphaTauri to replace Hamilton as Lawson moved to the empty seat at Ferrari. Yuri Vips went to Alpine to replace Lawson, and Zhou was dropped by Alfa Romeo as Jack Doohan claimed the seat. At post-season, Lawson was dropped by Ferrari and replaced by Jack Doohan. Marcus Armstrong went to Alfa Romeo to fill Doohan's empty seat, and Tsunoda was dropped by AlphaTauri and replaced by Zhou Guanyu. And finally, Stroll was dropped by Brawn in favour of the free agent Ocon. There were no regulation changes for Season 6, and the performance graph shows us that McLaren are now the third fastest car, with Brawn in 6th having made massive improvements. Season 6 now, and surprise surprise, Mercedes are still at the top with Leclerc claiming another title. Although Max got more wins, this was not enough, and the wins were spread out pretty equally between the top 3 in the championship. Special mentions go to Gasly, who managed one podium in the Aston Martin, which has now fallen off a cliff and is now worse than Brawn. And talking about them, there was nothing to separate the two drivers as they finished 6th in the standings. But now the driver moves, and Verstappen retired after losing another title. This led to Ocon replacing him at Red Bull. The Brawn seat was filled by Jenson Button, who was finally satisfied with the team's position and joined nearly 20 years after winning with the team in 2009. Russell was also dropped by Mercedes and replaced by Tsunoda, and Joe replaced him at AlphaTauri. And finally, Armstrong was dropped by Alfa Romeo and replaced by Vesti. For Season 7, there are powertrain and aero regulation changes, and looking at the graph, we have 5 teams at the top, followed by Brawn and Aston Martin a bit further down, and then the fallback markers just completely given up on development. Well, in Season 7, Mercedes won again, but Tsunoda won his first title. He absolutely destroyed his teammate, getting 11 wins and 15 podiums. Ocon and Pourchaire also got wins as finally Brawn looked first. Barrichello finished 5th as Button only finished 8th. Brawn were also 3rd in the Constructors' Championship. But onto the Button situation and I guess the rest of the grid. After signing on, he quit and retired at mid-season after getting 1 podium. This led to a few changes as Albon was signed to replace him and Stroll went to Haas. But at post-season, Piastri was dropped by Williams for Richard Verschoor and De Vries was dropped by Aston Martin for Iwasa. There weren't any reg changes, and after a big dip at the start of the season, Brawn came up to finish as the 2nd fastest team, but now there are also 5 other teams very close around them. In Season 8, Mercedes won again from Red Bull and then Brawn. Leclerc was back on top as he finished ahead of Tsunoda and Pourchaire. Talking about Pourchaire, he got 7 wins but only 1 other podium finish, which wasn't enough. Barrichello also got 2 podiums, and going down the standings, Sargent managed a podium and Albon got 2 podiums. Driver moves now, and at mid-season there was 1 change as Deruvala was dropped by AlphaTauri and replaced by Kalen Williams. At post-season though, Yuki was dropped by Mercedes and was replaced by Nick De Vries. Doohan was dropped by Ferrari as well and Novalak replaced him. Magnussen retired and Verschoor filled the empty seat, and Iwasa replaced Verschoor at Williams. Fittipaldi replaced Iwasa at Aston Martin, and finally Albon was dropped by Brawn and Piastri came back for a second time. There was chassis regulation changes for Season 9 and Brawn are finally cooking. And the performance graph, I don't know what happened, everyone's just given up or something. And just to let you know, the graph stayed the same in the next 2 seasons, so I won't mention it anymore. They've all just flatlined, so clearly the FIA have banned development or something, who knows. So, Season 9, and boom, we have a new winner. Mercedes still won the Constructors, but Brawn have finally got another driver winning the championship. Piastri's second stint with the team was successful as he got 7 wins and 13 podiums to finish 8 points ahead of Leclerc. Pourchaire also got 4 wins and is doing pretty well in that Red Bull, and the second place in the Constructors may have been lost by some poor performances by Barrichello, who only managed 118 points compared to Oscar's 301. But now onto the driver moves, and at mid-season De Vries was unsurprisingly dropped by Mercedes and replaced by Sainz. Sainz was replaced at Ferrari by Norris and Russell replaced Lando at Williams. Novalak was dropped by Ferrari and in came Verschoor to replace him. Albon went to McLaren to fill the empty seat there, and Fittipaldi was dropped by Aston Martin with Deruvala replacing him. At post-season there was a lot of change as Vesti was dropped by Alfa Romeo with Ollie Caldwell replacing him. Russell retired and Vips replaced him at Williams. Fittipaldi replaced Vips at Alpine and Pourchaire was dropped by Red Bull with Doohan replacing him. Sainz was dropped by Mercedes and Tsunoda was chosen to come back into the team. Drogovic was dropped by McLaren with Verschoor returning to the team, and Marcus Armstrong joined Ferrari and filled the empty seat at that team. Gasly was dropped by Aston Martin with Sato replacing him, and finally Hauger was dropped by Haas and replaced by Liam Lawson. That was a lot, and De Vries retired as well. There were no reg changes for the final season, so let's do this. Season 10 now, and Mercedes won the Constructors again to make it 9 out of 10 in the simulation. Brawn were finally up to second in the Constructors but ultimately couldn't beat the mighty Mercedes. Piastri however could, as he won back-to-back titles ahead of Leclerc and Tsunoda. Doohan and Drogovic also got 2 wins each, and finally Lando Norris got his win. Barrichello once again was far behind his teammate and could only finish in 8th with 1 podium. Well, that's all for this video, and if you enjoyed it and want to see more, subscribe to the channel and like the video to help it reach more people. Thank you very much for watching, and goodbye.